Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Leitner? Commissioner Walls?
Here.
Commissioner Rice?
Here.
Commissioner Duckham? Commissioner Tompkins?
Here.
Commissioner Mahoney? Commissioner Williams?
Present.
Commissioner Elwell?
Here.
Chairman Shotwell?
Here. We've arrived at the first...
Sorry.
I'm sorry. We've arrived at the first opportunity for public comment. Each individual will state their names. They have 3 minutes to address the board. You may only address the board under this public comment opportunity and may not yield your time to others. Board members will not debate nor answer questions at this time.
Peter Bormuth. I just wanted to take the time to thank all the commissioners who will not be here on the board in January. Commissioner Williams, thank you for your service. You weren't here that long. When you first were appointed, I was opposed to your appointment strictly based on a party affiliation, but I found you to be a very, very reasonable and, excellent commissioner. So thank you for your service. Kyle? Sorry to see you go. Obviously, we have some major philosophical differences, but I've always admired your work ethic. I think you've done a great job with the Lifeways and with the other issues that you've taken on as a commissioner. We'll certainly miss your service. Thank you very much. And Sarah's not here, but she's going on up to the legislature. I'm sure the Fair Board will miss her, but just want to thank Sarah as well for her service and wish her luck in her new endeavors. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Hearing none. Approval of the minutes of the October 30th study session.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Any questions or comments from the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, duly carried. Mr. Overton, your meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the agenda, we had MIDC reconsideration. I have been told that at this time the commissioner would like to postpone that reconsideration, and they would in turn instead like to hear from some of the individuals in the room who clearly have some expertise and thoughts on this matter. Assuming the board doesn't object, I wouldn't mind hearing from them.
David?
Mike, if you can clarify, adjourn to when? Or postpone, I think was a phrase you used.
My guess is that Tuesday night meeting, the full board meeting.
So following either our board rules, which I think are silent on this issue, or Robert's rules, is it not the subsequent meeting when a person can change their vote on a particular issue?
I believe that's correct.
How can we do that then?
What would be happening probably at the Tuesday night meeting would be a motion to rescind, not a reconsider.
Motion to rescind. Okay. Would have been good to know this ahead of time so we could have, I guess, talked about it a little bit more, but because my belief was it had to be at this meeting or never.
To rescind a motion, any board could do that. You could do it 6 months from now. There's consequences when you sign contracts and things like that for rescinding something. In fact, generally speaking, under Roberts, once you've signed a contract, you can't just rescind. You have to either break your contract, per the contract, that sort of thing.
But if I may, I guess another follow-up question. And Mike, out of fairness, I called you yesterday to suggest that you get answers to some of these questions so we weren't left hanging here. But and one of the potential issues then that it brings to mind for me is future boards. Can this board bind future boards? And if the next incoming board decides that they don't like this MIDC plan, can it again be revisited?
Well, assuming that the board here did rescind and in turn approve the plan, we would have an existing plan, therefore agreement with the state, and be providing services. If it's like any contract, if you want to, break that contract, you follow the terms of the contract. The board could could vote to break that, but there's, like any other contract, I assume you have to look at the contract, see what the terms are and those sort of things.
So I'll say this openly, I don't want to offend anybody by it, but it seems to, it's not been said why we would postpone until our Tuesday meeting, but it's apparent that it's because there's a need for actually 5 votes to change this action, not just a simple majority of those of us sitting here at the moment. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we're not there.
Correct.
Okay, I guess I don't like that, putting things off until votes are lined up for that, but it is what it is. Thank you.
Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a concern with the word rescind, too, depending on how you want to define it, but if you look up the definition, it means somebody forgot something, so you want to put it back in. In this case, I don't think we had anybody that forgot anything. I just think we had somebody that was, let's just say, had a change of mind. We'll put it that way politically. I just think this is a way to get the 5 votes, and I don't really care for it either. Thank you.
Commissioner Elwell?
So, Mr. Chair, how do we want to deal with this right now? Do we want to, I mean, I came prepared to have some discussions, I think at least 1 or 2 other commissions. Do we want to have them right now, or is there going to be a motion to postpone this item on the agenda, or what's the plan? And what's your preference?
You talked at the beginning to the fact that the policy is silent on this for the county. That's correct, because this meeting has become more and more administrative, more and more part of the board operations, instead of being a study session as it was originally crafted. The thought was that we wouldn't be taking action and that type of stuff, and upon review we found out that this meeting allowed the board to take action and has done that. And with that in mind, you're correct that we're probably swimming in a new spot right now. There's no doubt in my mind. But I think the true cost to the county on something like this would be responsible to listen to the people that it affects. And the implementation of it, while I agree with the feeling of a majority of the board that it's not a good plan, my review of what the job of the county is through the state of Michigan, we are a component unit of it, and our job, no matter how bitter the problem is, we have to find the cheapest solution, or most economical solution, I guess would be a better term, to deal with a problem. That doesn't mean we have to stop fighting the problem, but I think that we need to figure out a judicious way to solve this issue, to move forward, because it's going to happen. And the question is whether we do it under our plan and what we've negotiated with them, or we put up with an arbitrary plan from the state that could become, I'm not going to say punitive really, but could cost us more money. And looking at the economics of the taxpayers of Jackson County, and if we sue the state of Michigan or join suit with Oakland County or do any action like that, the only 2 people I see making money are the attorneys. It's going to cost the taxpayers twice. They got to defend it and fight it. And I think that that's where the problem comes in this type of item. I look at it differently than things we've done in the past and organizations that we've chosen to draw a line in the sand and say, we're going to take this to court, we're going to fight this, we're going to find out who's truly correct. I think at the end of the day, the county's got to do this, and it's one of those times where we as an organization have to find the most economical solution for the taxpayers, on top of also finding a fair pathway for the court system. That's my take on it.
So, working from the start of what you said, Mr. Chairman, I agree about this meeting. That I mean, we call this a study session, but for all intents and purposes, it's a commission meeting. We've taken action before, and this is our next regular meeting following the one we took action at. And, I guess we're jumping right into arguing the merits of it, which is fine. I think this is the place for it and time for it, respectfully. I see this as, it's an unfunded mandate. I mean, Mike and I had a fairly lengthy conversation yesterday, and I don't think many people sitting up here anyway would argue the fact that it is an unfunded mandate. And I think the unfunded part will get worse as time goes on. You can look at, Commissioner Williams pulled them up, the Senate Fiscal Agency analysis of it leaves a big open door on that. And the fact is that what we had here in this county worked. And the state made a determination that funding of indigent defense, I guess, was not adequate across the state. And they've thrown a big blanket over everybody and said, here's what you have to do. And, if they were fully paying for it, that would be different. They're not, in my opinion. And I just can't support it for the fact that it's an unfunded mandate, and they're creating a huge new red tape machine that has us complying with standards and forwarding information to them and them paying us. It just seems like it would have made so much more sense for the state to just take it on themselves, do it themselves. It would be more uniform, send us the bill for what we've been paying, and we'll call it good. But we've got this huge, again, red tape monster that, Deb has done a great job running what has to be run on it, but she's of the opinion, and I agree, that they're trying to push us into creating our own office and having employees that are county employees to do this. I'm never going to support that. And again, that's them trying to push us into that. It's wrong. And when I think about some of the other things we fought here as a commission, we fought another governmental unit with a rain tax, and we won. We had to sue another governmental entity. We fought the prayer issue. We were told we should not and could not have prayer at our meetings, and we fought it to the Supreme Court, invested our county tax dollars in it, and we won. And we did that on principle. And that's what this is about. This is about principle. John and I have been talking right up to the start here, and we know what likely is going to come if we don't agree to do this. I say let it come. Let them force it on us, because what they're doing is wrong. I'm not saying we don't need indigent defense in this county, but not this way. One of my biggest hang-ups, or bigger hang-ups, is the fact that they're refusing to provide funding for prosecution for presence of prosecutors at the initial court appearance at arraignment. That's wrong. The prosecutor's office represents the people. So we're paying to have attorneys there to defend the accused when it comes to bond conditions and bond amount, but we have nobody from the prosecutor's office. I can guess what they're thinking. They're thinking that we'll just do it ourselves and pay to have them there. And that's wrong. It should not be that way. And I don't often lose sleep over anything, but I was laying there last night thinking about this for 2 hours before I finally went to sleep. And it just comes to standing on principle and saying no. And if more counties had done this sooner, like Oakland County did, we'd probably be in a different position, and maybe we'd have the state's attention and things could change for the better. But I just am never one to just go along because they say we have to. If it was the right thing to do, I'd be here arguing to do it. But it's not. It's standing on principle, and this is not the right thing to do. And I don't take offense to how we're doing this vote, but it seems like we're trying to steer the action towards the time when we can get enough votes here. I talked to a commissioner last night that couldn't be here, and he asked me to vote yes on it. Not because he believed in it, but because he thought that then next meeting I could change my mind. And I'm not going to play that game, and it shouldn't be a game. We should come here prepared to vote, and if the votes aren't there, we should live with that. That's just my opinion. So I thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I've said this to a couple of commissioners, and I'll say it again. I understand that I'm short-term, that I'm going to be gone at the end of the year, and that this is an issue that the next board is going to have to ultimately deal with because it's not going to go away. But having said that, it doesn't stop me from being a political scientist. It doesn't stop me from being a citizen and a taxpayer and understanding that this is a rabbit hole that I'm not sure any government wants to go down in terms of local government, when you have another organization, an unelected organization, ultimately determining and dictating standards that are going to have a cost that are going to be passed down to the county. We see it with the Child Care Fund. We see it in education, particularly from the federal government down to the states, from the states down to the locals, all the time. And this is one where, again, I think that this is to the degree that we may be pushing sand uphill, if we can get the attention of our legislators, particularly Sarah and Senator Shirkey, that this really does need a legislative fix and should be done at the legislature, I think you need to ring that bell and to rattle the sabers as much as you can to get that attention, because, for example, as David pointed out, as Commissioner Elwha pointed out, when the defense makes a move, when the defense has to make a move, then we put pressure upon our prosecutor to do something in kind. And if we take a look at the Senate fiscal analysis that came out in the spring, and it may have been changed with new legislation, but from the total requests that came out from all local governments, they requested $85 million to implement the 4 standards that were initially set. From that, the state budget office determined that they were going to remove the prosecution staff requests, which reduced it $3.5 million. Then they removed the ancillary staff, which reduced it another $10 million. Then they removed all construction costs that was over $25,000. And then they added a 10% discretionary reduction of another $6 million, which got the MIDC cost estimate down to 60. So we're from $85 million that the locals requested down to $60 million. And then from the state budget office, they took that and they took out $15.3 million for the assumed partially indigent collections. So there's another $15 million that came out of the request that came from the counties originally. So the counties, the local request was $85 million, and the ultimate number that was rounded to was $46 million. So who's going to bear the brunt of those costs that were identified via the counties in trying to implement these standards? The counties are. So we're going to see that, in my opinion, as we add more standards. There's another 3 standards that I think are proposed, and we don't know what the number of standards are going to come forward. And I think that the county, you ultimately, are going to be dealing with trying to figure out what that budget, how our budgets are going to change to match the necessity of those standards. And it's just going to be that another, not just red tape, but another unknown in trying to define the budget, which I think we've done. Arguably, the county has done a very good job of. But when we run into things like the Child Care Fund, which is something we don't control, including the consent decree, that leaves us scrambling to try to figure out where those dollars are going to come from and what programs we're going to have to reduce to pay for those things. And I think this is another program that leads us that way. And so not only on principle, it's just bad government to be supporting something like this. Thank you.
Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I sat here, we got the public here. We have some people here who, as you said, Mr. Chairman, certainly have some knowledge about what we're talking about. On the other hand, I'm not going to speak to it, but at this point anyway, since it sounds like we're going to move this forward, but actually what the prosecutor himself thinks of about this and about what this will do to him leading his staff and potentially having to shift things around, the financial part of things. Again, I think the prosecutor's point of view on this is important. Another aspect is I listened to my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Elwha, Commissioner Williams, and for me, if I was sitting out in the audience, I would think we have two commissioners. We have two commissioners that have explained very well why it's important for us to push back on this. When you talk about people who understand this or work in the field or experts or what have you, these two of my fellow commissioners, from my perspective, have explained it to the point where if I was in the audience, I would be hoping that the commissioners would push back on this and vote no, just from the perspective of fiscal responsibility and also from the perspective of several of the unmanned or mandated expenses that we've accrued over the years from the state. And so again, I appreciate what my fellow commissioners have just said. And again, like I said, if I was out in the audience, they've convinced me that the best thing for the public of Jackson County would be to push back on this and vote no. Speaking of that, everyone knows I like to talk to the public, and I have talked to the public and explained to the public, and obviously not all the public, of course, but several people I've explained this situation to, and explained to them to the best that I could what's going on here, and I haven't found one person that wasn't glad that we voted no in the first place and this thing failed. So, but on the other hand, we up here obviously represent the public as well, but apparently the vote of 5-4 that caused this thing to fail was not good enough, even though the public I shared this with were glad to hear what we did. And I'm sure they'll be overly thrilled if this thing gets switched around again for let's just say for reasons that some people want. Thank you.
Ms. Stanley, would you like to speak?
I would, yeah.
Ms. Stanley's here from the state of Michigan and be willing to answer questions for the board this morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all. I'm Kristen Staley. I'm regional manager with the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission with South Central Michigan, Jackson County being one of my counties. I'd like to just quickly address what Commissioner Williams spoke to about the cost. So the state of Michigan actually funded all of the MIDC plans at $87 million for this first year. They are fully funded. Every single plan that was approved has been fully funded to the amount that was requested. Initially, it was $84 million in a supplemental request. It became a $3 million extra dollars that came through in these past couple of months as a supplemental. So, and that does include Oakland County as well. So all plans that have been approved are moving forward. And we're in the process right now of submitting budgets. Many plans, I think, have somewhere around the 70 number of plans. There's 134 local funding units, which includes all trial courts in the state of Michigan. Just about half of those have already signed a contract and are moving forward with their plan that has been approved, that the locals created. It has not... It was an open door. There's not been a prescription in terms of what type of system the local systems needed to do in order to comply with the MIDC standards. And to go over just quickly what these standards look like. There are 4 standards currently that have been approved by the state of Michigan. One that starts with CLEs, or credit, legal education credits for those who practice indigent criminal defense. That is standard 1. So now the state will be paying for all defense attorneys or all attorneys that practice indigent criminal defense for those people to be attending trainings, for the payment for trainings to be created at the local level, whether it's through the local bar associations or through other criminal defense associations such as the Criminal Defense Association of Michigan, or in partnership with the State Bar of Michigan, things like that. So that's standard 1. Standard 2 has to do with the fact that unfortunately, there's many instances where we have seen, and it's a best practice across the country, that there should be a confidential meeting space when you're meeting with your clients, whether it's at the courthouse or at the jail setting, and that clients who are, given or on that list of indigent defense, and you're on the court list, once you're appointed to a case, that you should be meeting with your client within a 3 business day mark. So that's standard 2.
Can I comment on standard 2 real quick?
Of course.
Currently at our courthouse, they meet in the hallway, a hallway full of other defendants, and the attorneys are discussing the cases with their clients where everybody else can hear. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. And we know that as a tenet of due process that you should be having confidential space with your attorney. Of course, yes.
So, just to that point.
It's been approved. In fact, it's going to be happening. And so there was actually... In fact, it wasn't. And so I know that Deborah and I worked back and forth together. It was not a cap. It was a guideline. There's many plans. In fact, there were about a quarter of plans that went well above the construction costs. And all you had to do is just explain to us, and I've been to the courthouse, I've been to the jails, I've seen what space exists, what space does not exist. The plan that is currently been approved by the commission would call for the creation of space, I believe in the basement, right? And so that's where the defense administrator would be set up. That's where we saw perhaps a comfortable space being set up in the future. Because this is an annual plan, this plan it's constantly changing. If you want to change it next year, that's fine. I think that this was for everyone, this is year one. This was brand new to us as a department. We are really only in year 3 of our existence, and so we saw this moving as like we picked this plan fully knowing that it was an unknown of what the funding situation was going to look like. Once appropriations were secured, then we came back, and to much of my past 6 months, I would say, people were very surprised to see me even coming back and saying, like, yep, we got full funding, everything is moving forward. That plan you submitted about a year ago, let's look at it again and see if that's really what's going to fit. And so an example here is that I gave back the plan and budget and said, does this still really exist in this budget? What kind of adjustments can we make? The appropriations has been made, so we cannot move forward beyond that I think $1.3 million that has been granted to the state, from the state to Jackson County for this plan. But we can rearrange, if we needed to adjust for certain types of supplies, or if we need to adjust hours of, one of the administrative assistants that we put into the plan. There are also 2 sheriff deputies that have been put in, for one at each jail. So that would encompass Standard 4, which I can jump back into, and just going over what the standards would look like. So Standard 2 would about the confidential meeting space and ensuring that attorneys, it's really on the attorneys to make sure that they are seeing their clients within a 3 business day window, which is very reasonable. And at Standard 3, the state provides extra money on top of the money that's already provided for experts and investigators.
You brought up another point.
Yep.
I'm sorry, but
Sure.
when we appoint our attorneys currently, our court-appointed attorneys do not see their clients until the day of the pretrial.
Right.
That could be 4 weeks
Right. Right.
from the time they're appointed in district court, from the time they're appointed until the day of the first pretrial. That's the first time they're meeting their clients.
And so really these basic standards are like what you would hope to see anyway if you were given an attorney. We're really just trying to get, and we understand, I'm an attorney, I practice in defense world, and I would like to say that my colleagues are already meeting this bar. We know the realistics, of this, that we understand that it really, there are lots of cases coming into the courthouse. There are not as many attorneys that are willing to take these types of cases, and we want to make sure that those who are taking these cases are meeting certain standards. And so that we want to make sure that they're having space to meet with their client, but also that they're doing their best work and actually meeting with them, not just before the case is in front of the judge. Yes?
A couple of questions. So the figure that Commissioner Williams put out, I think, is $85,250,000 was the original total request, and you're saying that was all funded?
Everything was funded. In fact, it's $87 million now. That's with the supplemental.
And so are there counties that receive funding for prosecutors' offices?
No county received money for prosecutor funds.
Okay, so looking at the Senate Fiscal Agency analysis of it, that figure is in there at $3.5 million. If $87 million was approved, why wasn't that approved? No offense, but I believe that Senate fiscal analysis is a little bit outdated as to what was actually happened. So the prosecutor costs were not approved by any commissioner. No plan had a prosecutor funding at all. It's not that it wasn't debated amongst our commissioners. In fact, it wasn't a unanimous vote. It came up on many public hearings that we have at our commission. But it came down to the fact that our mandate through our statute, the MIDC Act, does not, it only encompasses us working through indigent criminal defenders and the practice of the systems that fund those defenders. There are many things outside of this purview that we wish we could have. It does not include criminal defense attorneys as a whole. We only are prescribing anything that has to do with people who are on the court-appointed attorney list or work in public defender's offices. Is the state sweeping part of our collections back, our current collections? Is that the plan?
There has been a change in our statute has been amended, which will become in effect at the end of this month, December 23rd, I believe. That will, you currently have a collections rate, 20% will be, all of it will be collected here, 80% will be retained at the local level, 20% will be going back to into the MIDC budget, so that it will be funding MIDC plans going forward. So it all pertains to criminal indigent defense.
Do you not agree then that that is going to cost us money at the local level? It's money that we count on right now to fund what we do, and 20% of it is being retained. Would you not agree that common sense tells you it has to be?
Sure. For example, I don't actually know, and maybe someone, either Michael or Deborah could remind me of the amount of reimbursements. I don't remember that number. But it's 20% of, I would guess, or less, or Tammy.
If we're receiving
collections from indigent clients.
In district court is 154.
150, so 100,000.
Yes.
100.
District court.
District court. So $100,000 a year. So is that 60,000? Okay, so if it's about $150,000 then, so 20% of that will go back to the MIDC, so that will fund plans going forward. 80% of that will stay here. Again, at the local level, to continue funding indigent defense just like it was prior.
80% does, right?
On top of the grant that we're getting.
On top of the grant that you're getting.
Okay, and are all counties doing collections right now?
No, not every county collects.
So we're being swept for 20%, and other counties have chosen not to do collections, and it's just going to remain that way.
It's a local choice to collect reimbursement payments from indigent clients. Not every place does that. Some do a little bit more aggressive in terms of collections. It's also a determination that's made at the bench in terms of who is deemed eligible for an indigent defender.
Doesn't it, this is a kind of a broad question and opinion, but doesn't it make more sense to you to have the state totally doing this? And I said it in my initial comments that we're creating this whole new level of government with, information and reports and money passing back and forth, and it just makes so much more sense that the state.
Yep. Commissioner, I completely agree with you. In fact, I think that would make our lives a lot easier in our small office of about 10 people.
Well, I appreciate your
overseeing all the plans. No, I completely agree with you. Unfortunately, and not unfortunately, I mean, we are very much a local control state. And this bill and this legislation, which was created over many, many years, it first actually even began proposed in 2008, so it took about 10 years for our plans to go from legislation until actually into fruition and being funded. I think that the control should remain at the county level, at the local funding unit level, because that's how our court systems and that's how our justice systems are created in the state. MDOC aside, for example, but I do think that we are mandating standards, but these standards are very large constitutional standards that unfortunately we should have already be seeing in the state already. We are going to the first standard of CLE practices. We are one of only 4 states remaining in the entire country that does not require CLEs of any attorneys. And so this is really just a start to ensure that we actually have qualified attorneys that are practicing criminal defense for those who are the most vulnerable in our courts. Standard 4, which I didn't even talk to, when we're talking about counsel at first appearance, it is the very first time that a person is in front of the court. I don't know if you've, I'm sure that you've probably been to an arraignment or what it looks like at the courthouse and how fast-paced it goes. Those courts that already are doing this and had been doing this prior to the MIDC's existence, that includes Kent County and Ingham County and in Huron County up in the Thumb region, they have an attorney that basically stands there and is kind of like what you would deem a king or queen for the day. That it's like Wednesday's their day, Tuesday's their day, and they really just kind of help that person understand what they're doing here, understand that, and tell them what it's like. Okay, you're going to go see a judge. What kind of income do you have? Do you have family? Do you have dependents? They read them like, okay, this is what you need to do. Tell them, this is what you did, and then they process them. It's really just helping the system move faster in many ways. And oftentimes you can actually see a person, an attorney encouraging a person to plea at that moment where they maybe not would have pleaded at all, and then forcing them to come back, or it really just kind of moves the system faster. And we've seen a lot of judges being very excited about this process for those exact reasons.
I wanted to speak to the 2 judges and Tammy for a second too, if I may, and I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your knowledge with the courts and trust that you know what's best in this regard. But we sit here as 9 commissioners when we're all seated here trying to decide what we think is best for the county. And I see this as an unfunded mandate that's only going to get worse. I don't like the fact that we do not have funding in it for prosecutors at exams. And I just think so clearly I can't support creating this whole new level of bureaucracy and red tape. And I support all the things you're saying, Judge, and agree with those. I just think there are better ways to get there than by us being forced to adopt this. It's one thing if we say no, and the state puts us through mediation or arbitration and says, sorry, you've lost, here's your plan, implement it. That's different. If we get stuck with that, then we get stuck with it, much like Oakland County. But this is not right to do it this way. And I appreciate your honesty in acknowledging that you agree that the state should be doing this.
And I think everyone in our office would agree with that. But really, I mean, it's the way that I think that our state legislates. And I do think that there's a lot of good that comes from the local creativity. Not every county is the same. Marquette County is certainly not like Jackson County. I think there's different needs from each places. And so having that type of local control is very necessary.
Thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner, I appreciate your position. I can tell you this, though. We don't require prosecutors in the courtroom now for arraignments. The only time prosecutors come down are for pretrials or for preliminary exams.
So how
They're
is
not
it-
even-
Judge, but I understand that. But
How it does anything to the prosecutor? This doesn't affect...
it doesn't do anything to him, Tammy, but my expectation is that if there's an attorney there that's going to argue for bond conditions or bond for a defendant, somebody criminally charged, that there be somebody from the prosecutor's office there to represent the people.
Sure, here's the difference, though. During felony arraignments, when an indigent person comes in, the prosecutor's office is there.
Now,
Nobody there for the individual.
so now it's
So it's
not
different.
fair.
I'm just saying that, but that happens now.
Okay, so I think the way...
Make it a point to be there on a serious felony. Not your garden variety breaking and entering or something like that, but on a serious felony, there's always a prosecutor there, and there's never a
And if we're
defense attorney.
talking about leveling the field, then the simple, easy way to do that is just say, here's funding for the prosecutor to be there, here's funding for the defense to be there.
I don't
And you-
think they need, I don't see the need for that. The caseload, the way it
I
is
disagree.
they have, the caseload, the way it is, and I think Commissioner Rice was right. I think maybe the prosecutor needs to be involved in some of this discussion to let us know the setup of his department and where he has prosecutors going, assistant prosecutors, and what courtrooms they're assigned to. But they all have an assigned courtroom that they're going to now. So with the caseload, I don't think that it would be so overwhelming that they wouldn't have enough assistant prosecutors to cover the cases that we have now.
For instance, part of our plan was to have a single arraignment judge, that being the magistrate bishop. He was going to do all arraignments. That would only tie up one of the indigent defense attorneys and one prosecutor if one was necessary for all the arraignments, if they felt they needed to have somebody. So Fred was going to do all arraignments, and then that would free up so you don't have attorneys run into every courtroom to try to cover. Right.
And I was an assistant prosecutor, so from that perspective, it's been several years now, but I can't imagine why that wouldn't work.
Thank you.
And again, and I think that the judges would agree with me, and Tammy as well, that much of this has to do with efficiency. That we see those counties that have already been implementing this, and those counties that are implementing this do not currently have prosecutors that stand in an arraignment process. And they're large counties like Ingham and Kent. But what they see happening is that the person in front of them can make a plea, can have a person next to them telling them what's actually happening to them. It can be a very crazy experience if you've not been through the court system before, and can help move things along, and can help explain to the client and kind of navigate that person and say, yeah, you should plea, yes, you should not plea, this is what happens, and just moves really fast, much faster than it already was. And I think so that you actually see less repeat customers, if you will, less repeat clients coming back and forth who really just didn't understand the process from the very start. And that's what we're seeing now from those courts that are already implementing this Council at First Appearance project. Any other questions? And I'm sure I just ran through a whole lot of stuff, but...
Dr. Tompkins.
This is a question for my fellow commissioners. If you look at the legislative process, if the legislature and the governor pass a law, okay, and it comes down that you have to follow the law. I don't like unfunded mandates either, okay? I really don't, okay? But if they pass the law, okay, how can we ignore the law, okay, and not follow it? Because then you could do the same thing and say, I don't like taxes in Jackson County, we're not going to pay taxes. Or I don't like driver's license in Jackson County, we're not going to have a driver's license, okay? And on and on and on. We become the legislature for here, okay, and so on. So if the legislature starts the problem, I haven't heard anybody talk about this, if they start the problem, okay, is it incumbent for us to go after those legislatures and have them come here and explain themselves why they passed that, okay, and put us in this situation to start with, okay? Because the problem is not us arguing back and forth. You know, we all agree about unfunded mandates, but if the legislature up here says you have to do it, okay, and so on, then it's our job to talk to them or elect other legislatures, okay? That's my question.
Mr. Chairman, if I can answer that from my perspective.
I'm not walking out on you like that.
Thank you for coming, Judge, very much, both of you.
Yes.
We really appreciate it.
Thanks to both of you. Doc, I'll say two things about that. One is that I don't think we have a mandate to follow a law that we think is potentially unlawful. And unfunded mandates in Michigan are not allowed. And most knowledgeable people I talk to think this is an unfunded mandate. I think it is, maybe to a small part. I see Mike nodding his head yes, and that came out in the conversation yesterday. So do we just blindly follow everybody off the cliff? And I say no. And the question is, do we follow the law? Yes, unless we think it's wrong. And the perfect example of that is the rain tax. A local governmental entity, the city of Jackson, implemented a law that said we have to pay a tax for rain, essentially. We together said, no, we're not going to do that. And we fought it. We said no to their law, we refused to pay, and we won. So it's an example of the same thing, only in reverse. It's a local government telling us what we must do by their law, and we said no. I don't argue that there are many good things in this indigent defense proposal, but the way they're doing it and making it a partially unfunded mandate that's only going to get worse by their own documents, I can't support it, and I say it's wrong.
Talk to me, John.
Sure. And so you're 100% correct in the context that as an arm of the state, the county is an arm of the state. But the county is also empowered to make local decisions, be a local taxing entity, and we have to ultimately come up with a budget that funds our priorities based upon the dollars that we have coming in from our county, and then go to those priorities that we're going to, hopefully at some point in time, get to today when we talk about our strategic plan and where the county is going to go in the next 10 years. I think it's incumbent upon us, if we see a problem with our ability to meet budgets or determine budgets, to point those problems out. And I think this is a big budget killer ultimately. And it's not that there's a problem with the standards. They're good standards, and I don't doubt the intelligence of the standards. And it's not 1 through 4, but it may be 5 through 8. And it may be 8 through 20, 10 or 20, or how many ever standards come, where every time there's a decision and change that needs to be made, we don't know what additional changes may be made or may need to be made. Maybe not this time is the prosecuting attorney going to be affected by the standards and the changes, but what happens in the future? And that's where, when we have that loss of control, but the mandate to ultimately cover the cost, that's the concern. And that's where, if the state ultimately, and I understand the idea of local control and the laboratory of invention, of having the locals come up with creative ideas, but these are standards. And so the standards don't allow for a lot of wiggle room. And so if they're going to be set standards, then it seems like the state could easily be the administrator of those. And they would know the cost, and they would have to, ultimately finance the cost. And so that's where I think the issue lies. Not that it's a bad idea, not that I don't support indigent defense. If anything, we should go over on indigent defense. But it's the idea of how we determine our budgets and how we're going to be caught. And again, I don't think you have to look any further than the child care fund to recognize a fund that we don't have control over, that is always a mystery to us, and then ultimately we have to scramble to figure out how to fund when those dollars come in outside of what we intended them to be. So that's why I think you argue against or you push against, and you're hopeful that your legislators hear it and that they recognize that their community, their county is saying this is a problem. And if everybody ultimately goes along, then I don't think that the legislature see that there's a problem. And that's why I think you put your foot down.
So, one more thing too. I know the child care fund comes up as a comparison, and I'm very familiar with how the child care fund works, and in past positions I've actually worked quite closely with it. And the child care fund is a reimbursement process, and it's a state fund, and it's a very large fund the state manages, and it reimburses to the county actually after actions have happened. The MIDC grants are different. They're not reimbursement processes. The money that you request, you receive 100%, and that's how it was presented. In this first year, it was a provision of 50% right away as soon as the contract is signed, and then 25%, and then 20% as to 100% of money is given through the entire year. It's not based on whether or not you actually, based on the work that is done, it's based on the money requested. Just putting that out there in terms of
Does it say that the law?
That is the law, yeah, absolutely. That is part of
In perpetuity.
Yeah, absolutely. Commissioner Elbow is correct. It is against the Constitution to have unfunded mandates in the state. Everything's 100% money. It already is. In fact, your dollars are sitting there waiting for you. So it's about $1.8 million that have been appropriated to Jackson County, and to begin the process of coming into compliance with these first floor standards. And frankly, it's not. The plan itself went above and beyond the first floor standards, and that was a choice made by the county. It was not prescribed. You did not have to do that. There were many places that really stuck to 1 through 4. There was a little bit of an extra movement because I think in a county of this size, it makes sense to add someone who's overseeing the process as an administrator, so that it does lessen the burden from the court's position. I think that it is, an additional standard that is not mandated, that is not fully approved yet through Laura, includes independence for the judiciary. Because what occurs very frequently in most courts, so not all, but in most courts, it's that the judge appoints, oversees the billing of criminal defenders that come into the courthouse. So we're trying to rid that process, similar to how prosecutors are not overseen in terms of billing or appointing from the bench. So that's something that Jackson County went over and above to do.
I'm sorry, I didn't turn my microphone off before. Mike, have we made any attempt to send a formal letter to our representatives saying that we disagree and them to consider? Because I still think the problem lies with them because they passed the law, and if they haven't heard back from us that we think it is not appropriate, then they can't do anything.
The county commissioners have not, but we've talked to our legislators in MAC and many times about this. They all know our feelings on it. And frankly, if I may, Mr. Chair, just take a second here. Frankly, I think as everybody has heard, our board is thoughtful and articulate. And I don't think any of us really disagree with what has been said. It's just, how do we show our disappointment, if you will, in what has been passed legally, and register that. Some believe that, obviously, that we refuse to go along and that it be forced on it. Others believe that we should agree and then fight about it later. Okay. But the only thing I've heard here that I really questioned was when you said the 20%, how is that not an unfunded mandate? They're taking money that we have and...
Because it's being used for the same purpose that the money is being used for now. So that's the way, it's my understanding of case law of dealing with Headley Amendment challenges and unfunded mandates. If the money is reappropriated from something else, then that's a change to the mandate of the dollars.
So what looks to us like you're taking our money and using it, I mean...
It's going back into funding your plan.
But it's going into the state's portion of funding our plan.
At that point, is it? If you're taking 20% of our money, ever how small, you see my point? I mean, we have to make up that 20%.
Sure.
I think that, for me, that's the really big catch.
Absolutely, and there's many places, and it is also a local decision to collect those reimbursement fees. So there's many places that choose not to do so, and therefore there will be no 20%.
Well, that just makes it even worse.
But see, that is exactly right, and that's us paying for part of theirs then.
Yeah.
And I also know, too, that a separate commission has been formed in terms of trial court funding, has much to do with this particular instance in terms of collecting fees and how those are funding courts and how clients fund court maintenance and functions. That is not something that we are currently dealing with. We have some overlap of commissioners, but not really. And I also know that there's cases that have been moving through the Michigan Supreme Court in terms of trying to make that decision on is it a local tax, is it a fee, things like that. So you're right, there are a lot of questions up in the air in terms of what does that look like. But, and I will speak to also, you're right, if the process, what will happen, and this is written into our statute, that if you choose to not go forward with the contract, mediation process triggers. Mediation is the mediator is selected by both parties, by the MMEC Commission and the county. If that mediation does not work out, then the commission does move forward with a plan. Hopefully, one that would look very, very similar to one that's already been approved and submitted by your county, and that would move forward. And if that's, and so that would be the process for the moment. We've not seen the process move farther than that.
Commissioner Elwell.
I don't know if we're done talking about it yet, but I wanted to say it before I forgot, and that's to thank Deb for her hard work on it. My dissatisfaction with this is not a reflection at all on all the hard work she's put in, and I appreciate it. And Mike, for that matter.
Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been talk about the child care fund and other things, and how that all started and where it is now, obviously has turned into a financial issue for the county each and every year, it seems like. And then somebody from DHHS comes back to us, and we're asked to contribute, for example, this year, I think it was another $100,000. So, and I certainly understand what everyone's saying. You can explain something in a certain way to try to come across as though, well, this actually isn't an unfunded mandate. People can, the devils are in the details, and you can put all kinds of language that seems to say it's not an unfunded mandate, but in reality, I think it's pretty clear from the conversation here, this is an unfunded mandate, and so why would we commissioners want to vote against something that is unconstitutional?
Any other comments? Thank you very much. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, can I speak to the process now just for a second again from the start? So it's not that I don't have confidence in what I'm told about rescinding the motion, but is there wisdom in Mike seeking an opinion from council about where we'll go from here with this. I think there is.
We can. I've spoke to him. It wouldn't be anything for him to write it up.
Okay.
I think we're going to have a few more times to vote on this if we're going to be going to arbitration and everything else. So this will be an ongoing issue for us going forward.
Okay. Item two. Actually, our Michelle's going to come up to the podium. We,
Your meeting ID.
Sorry, that was preempted. She's dialing in now.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, at any rate, we had a process. It's time. I'm going to ignore that. It's time to start moving forward with a strategic master plan. Planning takes varies on the consultant who you use, but we allotted the year 2019 so that come January 1 we would have it in place. I love technology.
What I meant to tell you, I'm sorry, is that we may have a couple of those just until we get her figured out.
Yeah, okay. Hang on just a minute, Julie, Mrs. Novak. At any rate, as most of you know, in the packet, we had done an RFP. We had 8 proposals. We narrowed it to 4. Then we interviewed those 4. We had them come in, give us their presentation. We asked numerous questions. And then, and on the board docs, we have all 4 of those, their full presentation, or 4 full proposals. And of course, we're making a recommendation. We've asked the Novak group to come and present. They couldn't be here in person today, but we're going to attempt to do it over the technology. And if not, we'll obviously have to do it later. Please have the presentation, and you guys, if you have questions, by all means. Although I do think she has a hard deadline of like 9:45, so we got about 45 minutes. We should be able to hopefully get that done in that time. And then, of course, it'll go through the committee and, regular process of full board. Thank you.
Yeah. Julia, can you hear us?
I had an opportunity to meet with your staff team, and one of my colleagues was there last week to talk about the process that we have imagined for strategic planning in Jackson County, and excited to kind of get to this stage and share with the board a little bit about what that process might look like. So when I talk about strategic planning, I always say it's just the answer to 3 questions. What do we know to be true today? Where do we want to go? And then how are we going to get there? There's obviously a foundation of strategic planning in Jackson County that we can build on. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we do need to test it and see what, if anything, has changed over time. And most importantly, identify the new initiatives and things that you want to do in order to move towards the vision that's been identified for the county. So from our perspective, the process begins, every good relationship begins with a good conversation, definitely in person though, and we would come and just talk about the process and the timing and what the county's needs are, and during that time, take the opportunity to actually individually interview each of the members of the commission, so we understand what your expectations are from the strategic planning process. What do you want to learn? What are you seeing as needs that exist within the community, and where are you hoping the county will be 10 years or more into the future? answering that question, what do we know to be true today, is done through what we call an environmental scan. So it's kind of assessing the changes in demographics, looking at different demographic indicators in terms of household income, looking at the county budget, understanding where the county has been and kind of what the trends are of where it's going. There's also some qualitative input that we look for. What do people, whether they're county employees, board members, members of the public, or special interest groups that you have an interest in engaging in the process, what do they see as the strengths and weaknesses that exist within the organization, and what opportunities and challenges do they see for the future? We've imagined using a kind of two tools to get this input. One is good old-fashioned in-person meetings, because that's where you can really dive in and ask follow-up questions and get some good information. We also use an online engagement tool. It's called Bang the Table, and it's like, bang the table and get your attention. And it's an opportunity for people to participate either by answering survey-style questions or communicating on what they call a forum. That's a very kind of social media looking tool where there's a topic and perhaps a prompt question, and people can respond or submit their ideas. And we pull all that together during the environmental scan phase and prepare a report that includes all of the public input, the organizational input, the input from the commissioners, and the demographic and financial research that we would do separately, and present that at the very first retreat where we do the initial development of the strategic planning framework. Kind of the bones of the strategic plan include a vision, mission, and then what I would call critical success factors. In your prior plan, it was strands, and you had individual mission statement or vision statements for each of those strands. We would maybe consider the possibility of having an overarching vision statement that kind of serves as an umbrella and pulls everything together, and then still include those types of directional statements for whatever, you get to call them whatever you want, whether it's strands or critical success factors or goals. We walk out of that retreat with those key elements, and then we test that again with the community using in-person meetings and also the Bang the Table tool so people can participate kind of at their convenience. We bring that feedback back, work with the board to finalize the framework of the strategic plan and agree on what it actually is going to be, and then identify priority initiatives that you have an interest in pursuing over the next 24 months and beyond. So then the last step is to kind of work with the staff on implementation and identifying key metrics that speak to the critical success factors or strands, so that you can have a way of monitoring what, first of all, articulating what success looks like, and then monitoring organizational and community performance in that direction. So at a very high level, that is the overview of our process, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have this morning.
Ms. Novak, in the past, the Board of Commissioners have had topics that were outside of our purview. I think of one being education. And do you reach into that type of stuff, or is our strategic plan going to focus more on just county initiatives?
It's a great question. A successful community is made up of more than just a successful government. The key is, and I think one of the sample documents that we provided your staff, if it happens to be around, was Westboro, Massachusetts. And one of the acknowledgments we did in Westboro was there was a desire to articulate a vision for the entire community, and then identify what the municipal government, in that case's role, was in achieving it. There are things, and I'm sure you all have kind of heard about or seen somewhere the kind of circles of influence. You have the things that you can control, you have the things that you can influence, and then the things that you care about. And during the strategic plan, when you all identify initiatives, it'll be important to know what are the things you can accomplish as an organization, and those are where you really want to put your energy. and who do you want to influence, and influence them how? You have the ability to do that. So education is an example where within your community you have the university, you have public-private schools. What can the county do to support education in the community? What are things that you can do to help further an initiative? And then also recognizing within county government, there are things that I feel certain you do that are about lifelong learning, whether it's, some types of extension classes, or there's a library function, or seminars that you put on, and just acknowledging that there are things that you do that contribute to an overall desire for education. Was that helpful? I can't see your face, so.
Very helpful.
Okay.
Nancy, my name is John Williams, County Commissioner. I was here for the last strategic plan that we did 10 years ago. And one of the things that seems to be a difficult task is getting a real good cross-section of the community involved in terms of, I'm sorry, I said Nancy, Julie, my bad. Thank you, David. Julie, it's always, we see this in education of trying to get feedback from students or from individuals in the community, and we always seem to get oftentimes loud voices, which are great, but not always a good, strong cross-section of numbers. How do you address that? Actually, go ahead and explain how you would address that.
Okay, so you were breaking up a little bit. I think what I heard you saying was during the last process you had a really great cross-section of the community, and when I think I read it, you had over 150 people that were engaged in the process. And so what do we do, or what do we recommend in terms of outreach? Is that correct?
Yeah, that, and if there's any community survey, how you get that, again, more than 400 individuals to really truly get an understanding of what your community wants versus
Yeah. Okay, so we're not going to be doing a statistically valid survey. You all use the National Research Center's community citizen survey. So that is kind of some baseline data that we would have. But in terms of engagement, there's a couple of things to reach out. First of all, obviously the Bang the Table tool reaches people who have access to technology. And even with phones, it seems like more and more people have access. So we would encourage people to use that venue. And then when it comes to meetings, one of the things that we will do when we first meet with you is identify kind of who don't you hear from. What are some of the groups that are out there, quiet constituencies that you're interested in hearing from, and then develop some strategies to get to those. And so, for example, in Cincinnati, we did a big community engagement outreach effort, and we went to health department facilities in order to get people who were seeking public health services, so that people who might be renters or even in some temporary type of housing would not be underrepresented, which tends to happen in these types of processes, is homeowners tend to be the ones who engage more. When we've worked in university towns, we do outreach on the campus to encourage people within the university, both the faculty and the students, to participate in the process. One of the other things that we do is we use the elected officials to encourage participation. So, for example, in the second round of community engagement, we've proposed doing a couple of, we call them community summits, where we can handle about 100 people. I've had like 110 at any single meeting. And one of the things that we do is we give each of the elected officials tickets. And even though it's a public meeting and anyone can come, it's amazing what the type of response is when people are invited and when they understand that they've been, there's like a scarcity. I only got 6 tickets, and I really want you to be there. And for you all to do that type of outreach to people in the community means a lot and tends to yield very, very positive results. So those are some things that we've done to encourage participation by different groups throughout the process. Mhm.
Well, at this time, thank you, Mr. Novak. We look forward to seeing you
You're welcome.
person.
Sounds great.
Face-to-face communication. Thank you much. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Take care, Julia.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Well, once again, any questions? Obviously, you know the process. We'll bring her in next week, and we'll have a conversation. I'm sure it'll be a little more fruitful. She'll be able to explain and share some diagrams and do things like that, I'm sure. Hey, thank you much.
Anything else? I have a question, and I'd like to go back to the Indigent Defense Fund. I'd ask the administrator to map out direction for us now. Do we contact the state of Michigan and begin the arbitration process? Do we wait for them to contact us? I think we probably should know that going forward as a board. Could you give us a timeline Tuesday night?
Sure. Have to wait for 2 weeks.
Okay. Any other comments? Commissioner Williams.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to kind of follow up. To some degree, it's a fait accompli. It's going to either be foisted upon us, or we're going to ultimately enter into it or go into it with the plan we have. But I just want to bring up that $25,000 and that construction cost. You know, when you looked at our breakdown, we came up with a $25,000 set, and we did that in response to the fact that initially the state had denied anything above $25,000. And so it's I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but the idea that our construction costs to give the rooms and the space and what is found in the standards, and to do it properly in the courthouse, was probably going to cost more than the $25,000. And anybody who has any sense in construction knows that that's probably the case. So even if it does come to an issue of arbitration, just addressing that issue in and of itself is certainly to the benefit, I think, in my opinion, to the county. Because we went in with a plan that gave us specific constraints, and we met those constraints, and then we're told now today that those constraints really never existed, or that they don't exist because of the new legislation, but yet we're locked into a plan. So those are some issues that again, continue to at least haunt this process.
Commissioner Elwell.
Commissioner Williams didn't want to use the word disingenuous, but I will. I think it's disingenuous when we, in fact, thankfully have a plan, if it's forced on us or if we adopt it, that allows us for 2 jailers, I think, or deputies in our plan, and yet there's an adjoining county that was told, no, we don't allow those types of employees in the plan. So it seems to be that what you get depends on how hard you push back or how hard you ask. So I think many things that we've been told are disingenuous. No disrespect intended to the lady that was here, and I appreciate her coming, but it just, on so many different levels, is wrong.
Sorry, I just had a quick question. I'll do that, but can I get a clarification question on the timeline? So, just so that I can correctly relay to Kristen Staley, who was here, are we re-voting on this on the Tuesday night meeting?
Well, to be frank, It's up to the county commissioners.
Okay.
If a commissioner comes to me and wants to have a conversation about that, that's fine.
Okay.
That's each commissioner's right and privilege to do that.
Okay.
To be honest with you, everything I've heard tells me that you guys really are on the same page. You really agree that it's an unfunded mandate. I agree too. And that, by and large, we don't find them onerous or overly restrictive, some of the standards. That makes sense that you should have proper representation and so forth in a timely fashion. Again, the struggle is, do we go along or come along? So at this point, the board has voted to not enter into an agreement. So we won't be entering any agreement unless the board chooses to do something different, and that is really truly up to the board.
Okay.
I can't predict that.
Okay.
I think you're half correct. No, I think you're half correct. There's a tool within it that says this is your agreement now. They will meet with us and have an arbitrator and say this is our agreement. And we probably won't be expected to vote on it, will we?
So has the state been notified that we rejected it, that we voted no?
Yes, they have.
Okay.
Which is, Kristen called me last week in regards to the vote that we had in November that denied moving forward with this plan. Just keep in mind, we do have an approved plan, as Kristen indicated, granting us 1.2 and some change, not quite 1.3 million. But we do have an approved plan. The process annually is that this is considered a grant, and so we have to resubmit a plan annually. So as Kristen indicated, this will come up every year. So every year we will revisit resubmitting a plan. What does that plan look like? I've met with multiple times court staff, prosecutor, sheriff, undersheriff, with regards to the plan that we do have approved. So we do have an approved plan, which is a little bit different than Oakland County, but Kristen confirmed with me that we would move towards a mediation process. That might be a little bit different mediation process than what Oakland County had, because Oakland County did not have an approved plan. So our process of mediation may be a little bit different, but as she indicated today, we would go through the mediation process. So every year we will have a plan that we have to submit with regard to this, technically an application for the grant funding. With regards to this entire process, and Kristen Staley, I'm not sure how much you wanted me to get into the weeds, Mike, but okay. So again, this process started, as Kristen indicated, many, many years ago. I believe the legislation was actually passed in 2013, if I recall correctly. So this has been many years coming. The reason Oakland County is appealing to the Supreme Court is because the courts have not been supportive of the unfunded mandate argument. That was Oakland County's argument, and they lost. So that is why it is at the Supreme Court, is the argument of unfunded mandate did not work for Oakland County, essentially. So that's why Oakland County is where they're at. Most other counties and funding units, not all funding units are a county in the Tri-County area primarily, I believe are complying and are moving forward with their plans. I'm not aware of anybody other than Oakland County who has initiated any lawsuit or action in that regard. So Oakland County is the only one, to my knowledge, that I've heard of. With regard to the prosecutor issue, I know that's been a concern. The explanation that they gave me is back when all this started, the ACLU, MIDC explained to me the rationale for not including a prosecutor is when ACLU started this study many, many years ago, all this was initiated by the ACLU, who conducted a study on Michigan standards versus national standards, what our indigent defense looked like here in Michigan. As a result of that study, it started the conversation in Lansing, which ultimately resulted in the legislation, which ultimately resulted in MIDC. The rationale in not including prosecutorial staff is the ACLU and the legislators believed that funding was like this. It was a very uneven funding mechanism for the indigent defense and for the prosecutors. So what they're trying to do is make it an even playing field, and if they funded the prosecutors at this point, that would make it uneven again. So they're trying to make it an even playing field. Funding mechanisms for indigent defense have not always met the standards that the prosecutors have met. So I have talked to our prosecutor on multiple occasions. According to him, he's indicated that the State Prosecutorial Association has been involved. They're doing their own studies to get their own recommendations for staffing levels and that type of thing. So they're being proactive on their end, from what I understand, that will assist them in moving forward with some of the requests that they have that were denied. So my understanding is that they are moving forward on their side as a professional association. So, but that was my explanation from MIDC and why prosecutors or staffing was not approved. The state is trying to make it an even playing field for prosecutors and indigent defense. So, happy to answer any questions, or if I missed anything, happy to answer.
So is there a reason why we're not joining with Oakland County to fight on that single issue of unfunded mandate?
Not being an attorney, I'm just going to say the case has already been filed with the Supreme Court. We could, in my mind, without consulting our attorneys, I would believe at this point it's too late to join on to a lawsuit. The suit has already been filed. In my opinion, and again, I'm not an attorney, but I would believe that the best course of action would be to file amicus brief in support of them. But because the cases have already gone as far as they have to the Supreme Court, I don't know if there's a mechanism to tag on to the suit and become a co-defendant at this point.
I meant just pleading the same case they're pleading, really. And I think there's wisdom in that.
So that I understand, we'd like the administrator's office to contact our legal representation to see if we can add an amicus brief, correct? Well, that's... Do we want consensus, or do you want to put it in a motion?
Said yes. Is that a motion, Mike, you're nodding to?
Personally, yeah, if you wish me to spend money and direct an attorney, I would like a motion support and a vote.
I would so move.
We have a motion and support to file an amicus brief on behalf of Jackson County with the Oakland County case over the MIDC. Correct? Would you like to call the roll? I will call the roll.
Commissioner Walls?
No.
Commissioner Rice?
Yes.
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Mahoney?
No.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Commissioner Elwell?
Yes.
Chairman Shotwell?
How many, what is it? Fourth? Two? Yes.
So 5-2. Carried.
There you go.
Attorney today.
Any other items? Okay. Second round of public comment. You have 2 minutes. Anyone like to speak? Public comment.
With regard to the MIDC issue that you've been discussing, I find that the most dangerous part of the entire discussion is the fact that this is going to come up every year. This is a grant that will come up every year. If the state withdraws some funding from this program, which is always a possibility, you don't know what will happen up in Lansing, you will be sitting there and required to meet that gap if they have not also removed the requirements. There will undoubtedly be additional requirements. All bureaucracies tend toward expansion, so you are going to see more requirements. Whether those requirements come with funding or not, you don't know. I think that is the single biggest issue facing on this particular issue. And I, of course, have spent a lot of time in the courtrooms, whether I like to or not. I have seen many individuals up there who are indigent without attorneys, who don't know what they're doing, do not understand or know the process, are very easily led astray. I do not want to say that many of our public defenders are very good people who do their best under trying circumstances with limited amount of contact with the clients. There are also some people who are just up there to see that the process goes and to get a plea agreement. And those, I think it would be helpful for the defendants who don't know what's going on to have counsel at an earlier period, to be able to sit down and talk with them in a private room. There is no place up there. You literally talk to your counsel while you're sitting on the bench. And I think Judge Goostrey pointed that out. So those are all issues to consider. Obviously, the intention is good. It's whether or not the mechanism itself will work for the county. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hi, Tony Bear. You don't have to be indigent to have your legal counsel just push for a plea and not represent you strongly. I've seen that happen with some friends. And divorce court, now you're standing out in the same hallway with your soon-to-be ex-spouse, with their attorney and your attorney, and so confidential conversations being held just out in the hallway happens in a whole lot of different types of cases. You're not going to provide private meeting rooms for the two attorneys and soon-to-be ex-spouses. So I don't know why we're creating a different class of representation here. Unfunded mandates. One lady said it's against the Constitution. You don't follow unconstitutional orders. Soldiers are taught that right when they're oath for military service. You do not carry out an illegal order. Ask Lieutenant William Calley. He followed the order. He's still in prison. So just because the state legislatures passed the law doesn't mean we're obligated to follow it if it's unconstitutional. And if they've passed a law that isn't working for us, we need to encourage our legislators, repeal it or rewrite it, so that amend it so it is funded. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Any other public comment? Public comment is now closed. Commissioner comments?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't think it could be overstated. Deb's work on this to get us to a point of where we had at least the best plan we could possibly have, given the constraints that we know were there. I think it shouldn't go again unstated that we appreciate that, and we're working within the best direction we can given what we've been asked to do. And I think for the administration, for Mike and Deb, we appreciate that. And I just want to reiterate, not to beat the dead horse, but from the Senate Fiscal Agency, and I'll send it out so everybody has it if Dave didn't already do that. But to some of the points that were made from the public, if the intent was a discretionary 10% redux of what was being asked, and that they changed that, it just shows concern that the state thinks in terms of that we're going to be asking for more than is necessary to incorporate those standards. And that just puts us in an untenable position every year that we have to apply for this grant. So I appreciate the work of this board, and I appreciate the consideration, and look forward to the process moving forward. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Elwood?
Just want to thank the board for entertaining the discussion and debate here. And I pointed this out to Mike yesterday when I talked to him at length that when we held our last meeting and voted this proposal down, I was surprised that had happened, and I wanted to make clear to Mike that I did not go out recruiting other commissioners to take my position on it. It was just a heartfelt argument on my part, and I didn't want somebody to think that I went out there rounding up votes to do this mutiny, but I just think it's important that we take a position on it, and I thank you.
Any other commissioner comments? Seeing or hearing none, we are adjourned.